Have you ever noticed how certain people command respect without saying a single word? That person who walks into a room and instantly changes the energy, not through force or aggression, but through a quiet, unmistakable power that makes everyone else instinctively straighten their posture. What you're witnessing is the coldest law of human psychology in action, and today I'm going to reveal exactly how it works. From the moment we first open our eyes to this world, society begins programming us to react. When someone criticizes us, we defend. When someone threatens us, we attack. When someone pushes our buttons, we explode. This emotional conditioning runs so deep that most people never question it. They spend their entire lives as psychological puppets, dancing frantically whenever someone pulls their strings. Has this ever happened to you? Someone says something that instantly triggers you, and before you can even process what's happening, you're already knee-deep in an emotional reaction, heart racing, voice rising, composure crumbling. In that split second, you've handed over your personal power to another person, giving them the blueprint to your psychological control panel. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely transform how others perceive and respond to you. There's a profound difference between reacting and responding, a difference that determines whether you move through life as a master of your own destiny or as a marionette controlled by everyone around you. The coldest truth about power dynamics is this: if you can be provoked, you can be controlled. Every emotional outburst, every defensive explanation, every triggered reaction is essentially a confession of vulnerability. You're telling the world exactly which buttons to push to manipulate your behavior and decisions. But there exists another way to navigate human interactions, a path of calculated composure that the most influential figures throughout history have walked. This isn't about becoming emotionless or cold. Rather, it's about developing what I call strategic emotional intelligence, the ability to feel everything deeply while being controlled by nothing. What makes this approach so devastatingly effective is that while everyone else is bleeding information about themselves through impulsive reactions, you become increasingly unreadable and therefore impossible to manipulate. The less others can predict your responses, the more power you accumulate in any dynamic. The transformation we're about to explore goes deeper than simple self-control techniques. It's about fundamentally rewiring how your mind processes provocations, challenges, and conflicts. When you master this approach, something remarkable happens. People begin treating you differently, not because of what you're saying, but because of what you're not saying. The revelation that changes everything about human dynamics is this: if you can be provoked, you can be controlled. This insight might seem simple on the surface, but its implications run deeper than most people ever realize. Think about it. Every time someone manages to trigger an emotional reaction in you, they're essentially conducting reconnaissance on your psychological terrain. They're mapping your triggers, your insecurities, your pressure points, creating a blueprint they can use to manipulate your behavior whenever they choose. Behind the scenes of every emotional reaction is a surrender of power so profound that most never even recognize it's happening. When someone says something that provokes you and you immediately defend yourself, explain your position, or lash out in anger, you've just handed them a roadmap to your internal control panel. You've shown them exactly which buttons to push to get precisely the response they want from you. This revelation completely transforms how you view provocative situations. That colleague who always knows how to get under your skin, that family member who can turn you from composed to furious in seconds. They're not just annoying, they're essentially puppeteers who've learned which strings to pull to make you dance to their rhythm. If you're ready to master the art of strategic response, hit subscribe to join others walking this path of psychological sovereignty. The hidden truth about power dynamics that most people misunderstand is that volume rarely equals strength. Society has conditioned us to believe that power looks like domination, being the loudest voice in the room, the most aggressive person at the table, the one who can verbally overpower others. But authentic power operates in precisely the opposite way. True power is cold, calculated, and strategic. It doesn't announce itself with noise and displays of emotion. It reveals itself through precision and control. Throughout history, the most influential figures understood that the person who responds controls the situation, while the person who reacts gets controlled by it. This principle transcends culture, time periods, and contexts because it's rooted in fundamental human psychology. Consider the imagery of a chess master versus an amateur player. The amateur makes impulsive moves, reacting to immediate threats, focusing only on their next move. The master, however, sees the entire board, anticipating sequences, setting traps, and maintaining strategic patience. Their decisions aren't based on emotional impulse, but on calculated advantage. The master doesn't just play the pieces, they play the player, exploiting predictable patterns and emotional vulnerabilities. This same dynamic plays out in every human interaction. When you master your internal state, you stop playing checkers and start playing chess with every conversation, negotiation, and relationship. You develop the capacity to see beyond immediate emotional triggers to the strategic landscape beneath them. You recognize when someone is attempting to provoke you into a predictable response pattern, and instead of following that script, you rewrite it entirely. Now, I want to go even deeper into what happens in the psychological warfare that unfolds in everyday interactions. The journey toward this mindset begins with a profound realization. Most people are operating from programming they never consciously chose. Drop. I see the patterns in the comments. If you've started noticing these manipulation attempts in your own life, this reactivity we all experience isn't some personal failing. It's deeply wired into our evolutionary biology. We're all born reactive beings because, for our ancestors, instantaneous reactions were essential survival mechanisms. When our ancient predecessors heard a twig snap in the forest, that immediate surge of adrenaline, the rapid heart rate, the rush of blood to the limbs, all of it served a vital purpose. That split-second reaction could mean the difference between life and death. But here's the crucial revelation that changes everything. We're no longer living in that primal landscape. The threats we face today rarely require immediate physical reaction, yet most people still operate from this same ancient programming, responding to email criticism as if it were a predator's growl, treating a challenging question like a physical attack, and reacting to social media comments as though they were imminent dangers. This outdated programming creates a profound disconnect between our internal responses and the actual requirements of modern situations. When someone challenges your ideas in a meeting, your biology might trigger the same cascade of reactions designed for physical combat, but acting on that impulse creates precisely the opposite effect than what would serve you. The very mechanism that once protected our ancestors now becomes the pathway to our psychological subjugation. This brings us to what I call the law of cold reaction. The colder your response becomes, the greater your power grows. This isn't some abstract philosophy. It's a practical framework for navigating complex human dynamics. When everyone around you is operating from emotional reactivity, the person who maintains composure automatically assumes a position of psychological advantage. The journey toward this kind of emotional mastery represents a fundamental shift in how you relate to your feelings. Most people have been taught that emotions are something that happen to them, forces they must express, validate, or suppress. But this perspective leaves you perpetually at the mercy of whatever emotional weather happens to be passing through your psychological landscape at any given moment. The breakthrough comes when you begin viewing emotion differently, not as a gospel truth that must be honored and expressed, but as data that can be analyzed and utilized. A true strategist sees emotion as a tool in the arsenal of influence, not as an unquestionable directive that must be followed. In any arena where power dynamics are at play, whether a boardroom negotiation, a personal relationship, or even a simple conversation, the first person to lose their emotional composure has already forfeited control. This mindset transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's cultivated through deliberate practice, through moments when you feel the surge of reactivity rising within you, but choose to observe it rather than become it. You're developing the capacity to feel the full intensity of your emotions without being controlled by them, to use their energy while maintaining strategic direction. Behind the scenes of this transformation is the development of a different relationship with your internal experience, one where you're the director, not just an actor being directed. You're no longer identified with the emotional currents moving through you. Instead, you're the conscious presence witnessing and working with those currents. Write in the comments, "I am the director," if you're ready to stop being controlled by your emotional reactions and start using them strategically. The foundation of this psychological transformation requires a fundamental shift in how you perceive challenging situations. Most people view conflict as something threatening, an attack to defend against, an obstacle to overcome, or a problem to solve. But what if every conflict is actually a goldmine of strategic information just waiting to be extracted? This perspective shift completely transforms how you navigate difficult interactions. Instead of immediately jumping to defense or counterattack when someone challenges you, you begin analyzing what their provocation reveals about them. Every attempt to trigger you becomes a window into their psychology. Every push against your boundaries becomes insight into their strategy. Every emotional outburst becomes a map of their insecurities. You're essentially turning their weapons into your tools. The very things designed to destabilize you now serve to inform your understanding of the psychological terrain. This approach requires discipline, the capacity to override your initial reactive impulse and replace it with strategic observation. But the intelligence you gather through this process gives you an almost unfair advantage in navigating complex human dynamics. Now, I want to go even deeper into an overlooked revelation about power dynamics that completely contradicts what most people believe. There's a persistent myth in our society that power looks like dominance, like taking up space, like being heard above others. But the hidden truth reveals the exact opposite. The loudest person in the room is almost always the weakest. When someone feels compelled to raise their voice, to dominate conversations with their opinions, to constantly assert their presence through noise and interruption, they're broadcasting something profound about their internal state. They're revealing a desperate need to be seen, heard, and validated, essentially confessing their insecurity to everyone paying attention. The person who must raise their voice has already lost the war of perception before the battle even began. True power doesn't announce itself through volume. It reveals itself through the magnetic pull of composed silence. The most influential person in any room is rarely the one talking the most, but the one who speaks with precision and purpose when they choose to speak at all. This principle extends into a deeper insight about information asymmetry in human interactions. When you react emotionally to provocations, you're essentially bleeding information about yourself, revealing your triggers, insecurities, and pressure points to anyone observant enough to notice. Each emotional reaction becomes a confession of vulnerability, a data point that others can use to map your psychological weaknesses. But when you master the art of strategic response, something remarkable happens. You create mystery. You become unreadable, unpredictable, impossible to manipulate through emotional triggers. This uncertainty generates a form of psychological leverage that skilled negotiators and influencers have utilized throughout history. When others can't predict your reactions or read your internal state, they begin approaching you with greater caution, respect, and even a subtle fascination. The transformation this creates in how others perceive and interact with you becomes immediately apparent. Type, "I create mystery, not history," in the comments if you're beginning to see how this principle could completely shift the power dynamics in your relationships and interactions. The path toward this level of emotional mastery requires a fundamental shift in how you process your internal experiences. Most people treat their emotions as gospel, immediate truth that must be expressed, validated, or acted upon. But what if you approached your feelings with the same objectivity that a scientist brings to examining data? This perspective transformation changes everything. Instead of immediately expressing whatever emotion arises, develop the discipline to feel it fully while simultaneously studying it with detached curiosity. What triggered this response? What historical patterns might it connect to? What information is it providing about the current situation? This dual awareness, being fully present with your emotion while maintaining analytical distance, allows you to extract the intelligence within the feeling without being consumed by its intensity. Subscribe now to continue your journey toward emotional mastery and unlock more powerful insights into human psychology. This scientific approach to emotional processing represents a profound evolution in human consciousness. It's the difference between being controlled by your internal weather and becoming the meteorologist, someone who can recognize patterns, predict developments, and prepare accordingly without being swept away by the storm. This capacity for dual awareness becomes your hidden advantage in every challenging interaction. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a quality that often gets completely misunderstood: strategic patience. When you don't immediately fire back at someone who's provoked you, most people interpret this as passivity, weakness, or indecision. But there's a crucial distinction that changes everything. You're not being passive, you're being patient. And patience, when wielded strategically, becomes one of the most powerful forces in human dynamics. Most people never tap into this power because they're too busy reacting to whatever stimulus appears in front of them. They're like hunters who fire at the first movement in the bushes, often missing their target and revealing their position in the process. But the master hunter waits, observes, gathers information, and strikes only when the moment is perfect. This principle of perfect timing appears consistently across every domain of human excellence. The most successful leaders, negotiators, and influencers throughout history share this common trait. They wait for the optimal moment to make their move. They recognize that timing often matters more than the content of the response itself. They've developed the discipline to watch for those precious moments when their counterpart is emotionally compromised, overextended, or caught off guard. The capacity for strategic delay becomes the invisible dividing line between true tacticians and emotional slaves. When you master this discipline, you begin operating from a completely different level of psychological advantage. You're no longer dancing to everyone else's rhythm. You're composing the music to which others find themselves mysteriously moving. Now, I want to go even deeper into what happens in the mind of someone who has mastered this approach. There's a profound inner shift that occurs when you stop viewing immediate reaction as strength and begin recognizing the power of calculated response. This mindset revolution transforms not just how you handle conflict, but how you navigate every aspect of life. Type, "I master timing," in the comments if you're ready to develop this level of strategic patience in your own interactions. Now, let me reveal one of the most counterintuitive weapons in psychological warfare, something so subtle yet devastatingly effective that most people completely underestimate its power: strategic silence. When someone is raging at you, desperately trying to provoke a reaction, raising their voice, pushing your buttons, and you respond with nothing but calm silence or perhaps just a slight smile, something profound happens in their psyche. They expected resistance. They anticipated emotional reciprocity. Their entire strategy was built around getting you to engage in their chaos. Instead, they encounter a wall of composed stillness that acts like a mirror, reflecting their own emotional turbulence back at them. This void you've created becomes psychologically unbearable, a space they feel compelled to fill with more words, more emotion, more revelation. The transformation this creates in the dynamic is immediate and palpable. Without saying a word, you've completely shifted the power balance. They're now performing for an audience that isn't participating, and with every passing moment of your silence, they become increasingly aware of their own emotional display. What started as their attempt to control you has become your silent control over them. Behind the scenes of this approach is a deeper revelation about personal development. Every single time you choose not to react emotionally to provocation, you're building another layer of psychological armor around yourself. This isn't some theoretical concept. It's a neurological reality. You're literally rewiring your brain's response patterns, creating new neural pathways that bypass your reactive programming. This invisible fortress you're constructing isn't about becoming cold or disconnected from your humanity. It's about developing what ancient philosophers might have called higher logic, a way of processing reality that transcends the emotional spikes and valleys that control most people's decisions and behaviors. You're essentially operating from a different level of consciousness entirely. The impact of this approach extends into every area of your life where timing matters, which is virtually everything. Real influence doesn't come from speed or immediate reaction as most people believe. It comes from impeccable timing. The person who controls when things happen, who sets the pace of conversations and confrontations, holds tremendous psychological advantage over those who feel compelled to respond instantly to every stimulus. Think about the most skilled negotiators, leaders, and strategists throughout history. They all understood this principle on a fundamental level. They recognized that rushing to respond often signals desperation or insecurity, while measured timing communicates confidence and control. They knew that the moment you choose to act is often more important than the action itself. When you develop this capacity for strategic timing, you're no longer at the mercy of other people's conversational pace or emotional urgency. You're operating from your own internal clock, making moves when they serve your objectives rather than when others pressure you to respond. This creates a profound shift in how others perceive your words and actions. They carry more weight precisely because they aren't impulsive or reactive. Now, I want to go even deeper into the psychological mechanics of what happens when you master this approach. The journey toward emotional sovereignty creates a fascinating paradox that transforms how you experience challenging situations. Comment: I embrace the power of silence. If you've experienced moments where saying nothing was more powerful than any words you could have spoken. The journey towards psychological sovereignty requires you to challenge one of the most deeply ingrained social conditionings we all receive: the belief that immediate response equals strength. From childhood, we're taught that quick comebacks demonstrate intelligence, that instant reactions show engagement, that immediate answers prove competence. But this cultural programming creates a profound blind spot in our understanding of true power dynamics. The hidden truth that transforms everything is this: the person who can strategically delay their response, who can sit comfortably with discomfort and uncertainty while gathering more information, demonstrates a level of self-mastery that most people never develop. This capacity for calculated pause becomes your secret weapon in navigating complex human dynamics. Most people rush to fill silence because silence makes them uncomfortable. They feel compelled to speak, to react, to fill the void, often saying things they haven't properly considered and revealing far more than they intended. But when you develop the discipline to embrace strategic delay, you gain an almost unfair advantage in every interaction. You're operating from a place of patience and precision, while others are trapped in impulsivity. This fundamental difference in approach creates a striking contrast between two types of people. The average person operates like a match, instant spark, bright flame for a brief moment, quickly burning out with nothing substantial left behind. Their reactions are predictable, their energy gets depleted rapidly, and their impact fades as quickly as it appeared. But when you develop emotional mastery, you transform into something entirely different, a fuse. A fuse burns slowly, quietly, with controlled intensity. When it finally reaches its target, the explosion is deliberate, precise, and devastatingly effective. This is the difference between reactive outbursts and strategic responses. While others waste energy on immediate emotional discharge, you're building pressure, gathering intelligence, and preparing for maximum impact when the moment is right. The political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli understood this principle at a depth that most never reach. He recognized that in the complex dance of human interactions, appearances often matter more than truth itself. When you master strategic delay, you're not just buying time, you're crafting an image of calm dominance that unsettles and influences everyone around you. People witness your composed demeanor during stressful situations and automatically assign you greater competence, authority, and trustworthiness. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a profound psychological insight. While others mistake your patience for passivity, you're actually engaged in intensive reconnaissance. You're studying behavioral patterns, mapping psychological weaknesses, predicting probable responses, and calculating the most effective intervention points. This level of strategic thinking gives you an almost supernatural advantage in negotiations, conflicts, and complex social dynamics. The journey toward this mindset shift isn't about becoming calculating in a negative sense. It's about developing a deeper understanding of human psychology and applying that understanding with precision. Nature provides us with the perfect metaphor for this approach. A snake doesn't strike when it's angry or threatened. It strikes when the timing creates the highest probability of success. Share "I am the strategist, not the reactor" in the comments if you recognize how this principle could completely transform your approach to challenging situations. The most fascinating aspect of this psychological approach is what happens beneath the surface during periods of strategic patience. While those around you might mistake your calculated composure for passivity or even weakness, you're actually engaged in something far more powerful: intensive reconnaissance. In these moments of apparent stillness, your mind is actively gathering intelligence that gives you an overwhelming advantage in the interaction. You're studying behavioral patterns, noticing how they respond to different stimuli. You're mapping psychological weaknesses, identifying which topics trigger emotional responses. You're predicting their probable next moves based on their established patterns. And most importantly, you're calculating the most effective intervention points, those precise moments when your words or actions will have maximum impact. This intelligence-gathering operation happens invisibly, behind a mask of composed silence. The other person has no idea that while they're emotionally leaking information about themselves with every word and gesture, you're collecting and cataloging it all for strategic advantage. This level of psychological awareness creates an almost supernatural edge in navigating complex human dynamics. Nature itself provides us with the perfect metaphor for this approach. Consider how a snake operates when hunting. It doesn't strike when it's angry or threatened. Emotions have nothing to do with its timing. It strikes when the circumstances create the highest probability of success. It waits perfectly still, gathering information about its environment, conserving energy until the exact moment when action will be most effective. This represents a completely different relationship with action and timing than most humans have developed. Most people operate from emotional urgency rather than strategic advantage. They act when their feelings peak rather than when the moment is optimal. This fundamental difference in approach separates true strategic thinkers from those who remain slaves to their emotional impulses. Now, I want to go even deeper into what happens when you master this approach. When you develop the discipline to delay your responses and withhold the immediate reactions people expect from you, you create a profound psychological discomfort in others that works entirely in your favor. This discomfort isn't accidental. It's a feature, not a bug of the strategic approach. Most people in modern society have become absolutely addicted to instant responses, immediate feedback, and constant validation. Their psychological equilibrium depends on predictable social exchanges. When you deny them this comfort, when you respond with measured silence instead of expected reaction, something fascinating happens in their mental state. They begin to unravel. This disruption of expectations creates a psychological vacuum that most people find deeply unsettling. They need your reaction to feel stable, to confirm their impact on you, to validate their own position. When you withhold that expected response, they're left in a state of uncomfortable uncertainty. This uncertainty triggers a cascade of psychological effects: anxiety, self-doubt, overcompensation, and often revealing far more than they intended. The transformation this creates in the power dynamic is immediate and palpable. By simply refusing to dance to their emotional rhythm, you've shifted from responder to initiator, from reactive to strategic, from being acted upon to being the one who controls the pace and direction of the interaction. Drop "I create discomfort" strategically in the comments if you're beginning to see how this principle could completely change your approach to challenging conversations. The psychology behind this disruption of equilibrium reveals something fascinating about human interaction. People become profoundly anxious and restless when they can't predict or control your responses. This isn't just casual discomfort, it's a fundamental destabilization of their psychological foundation. Most people need your reaction to confirm their impact on you, to validate their own emotional state, to feel a sense of control over the social exchange. Think about what happens when someone insults you expecting anger, and you respond with calm curiosity, or when someone attempts to pressure you expecting compliance, and you respond with comfortable silence. These unexpected responses create cognitive dissonance, a psychological state where their expectations and reality don't align. The mind finds this state deeply uncomfortable and will work desperately to resolve the contradiction. When you refuse to provide the emotional fuel they're seeking, their internal equilibrium gets completely disrupted. They begin questioning their approach, their understanding of you, and often their own emotional response to the situation. This disruption creates a moment of psychological vulnerability that completely shifts the power dynamic in your favor. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a profound revelation about the nature of emotional detachment, something that most people completely misunderstand. Real emotional detachment isn't about becoming numb or shutting down your capacity to feel. That would be emotional suppression, which is just another form of reactivity with a time delay. True detachment is something entirely different. It's about developing such mastery over your emotional responses that your emotions obey you rather than controlling you like a puppet master pulling strings. You're not denying your feelings, you're experiencing them fully while maintaining executive control over how they manifest in your behavior. You can observe anger, fear, hurt, or excitement moving through your system like weather patterns without being swept away by their intensity. This level of emotional sovereignty becomes your greatest asset in navigating complex human dynamics. While most people live as emotional puppets dancing to whatever tune their feelings play, you develop the capacity to watch chaos unfold without stepping into the storm. This doesn't make you cold or disconnected. It makes you strategic and sovereign. Now, I want to go even deeper into a revelation that might completely change how you view human psychology. Every control system throughout history, from political regimes to manipulative relationships, has used emotion as its primary leash. This isn't accidental or coincidental. It's by deliberate design. Guilt to make you comply when you want to assert boundaries. Fear to keep you small when you might otherwise expand. Anger to make you reactive when strategic patience would serve you better. Shame to diminish your confidence when self-assurance would make you harder to control. These emotional triggers aren't just natural feelings arising spontaneously. They're often weapons being deployed against you in ways you've never consciously recognized. When you respond blindly to these emotional triggers without examining their source or purpose, you're not operating as a free individual making conscious choices. You've become programmable, predictable, controllable, the person or system that can consistently trigger specific emotional responses in you, essentially owns your decision-making process, even though you believe you're acting from your own will. Drop I. Recognize the emotional leash in the comments if you're starting to identify these control mechanisms operating in your own life. The impact of recognizing these emotional patterns extends far beyond just personal interactions into every area of your life. Marketing campaigns, political messaging, social media algorithms, workplace dynamics, they all depend on triggering predictable emotional responses that lead to desired behaviors. When you respond blindly to these triggers without examining their source or purpose, you've essentially handed over the controls to your own psychology. This predictable programming creates an invisible prison most people never even recognize exists. They believe they're making independent choices based on their authentic feelings, when in reality, they're following precisely the emotional script that's been laid out for them. The person or system that can consistently trigger specific emotional responses in you doesn't just influence your behavior. They essentially own your decision-making process. The liberation comes when you develop the awareness to see these patterns and the discipline to choose your responses rather than having them chosen for you. This level of psychological sovereignty was understood centuries ago by Niccolo Machiavelli, who grasped something that most people never comprehend. Emotion is simultaneously your greatest vulnerability and your most powerful weapon, depending on how you choose to wield it. Machiavelli's revolutionary insight was that he never trusted his own emotions to guide important decisions. He recognized that feelings are easily manipulated, often irrational, and frequently disconnected from optimal outcomes. But simultaneously, he became a master at understanding and exploiting emotional reactions in others, while keeping his own feelings buried beneath layers of strategic calculation. The transformation this creates in your decision-making process is remarkable. Instead of feeling your way through life like most people do, you begin thinking your way through complex situations. This doesn't mean becoming emotionless or cold. It means rising above the emotional current that sweeps most people along without their conscious awareness. Operating from a higher level of consciousness where emotion becomes data rather than directive. This elevated perspective allows you to see patterns and connections that remain completely invisible to those caught in emotional reactivity. It's like developing a form of psychological night vision, suddenly perceiving dynamics and opportunities that others can't see because they're blinded by their emotional responses. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a fundamental shift in how you process experience. Most people operate with emotion as the primary filter through which they interpret reality. Something happens, it triggers an emotional response, and that emotion determines their perception and subsequent behavior. But when you develop emotional sovereignty, you create a different sequence altogether. You experience the event, notice the emotional response arising, analyze what that response reveals about the situation and your own patterns, and then choose a strategic action based on desired outcomes rather than emotional impulse. This creates a profound shift from reactive to proactive living, from being controlled by circumstances to shaping them deliberately. The journey toward this level of self-mastery isn't about becoming calculating in a manipulative sense. It's about developing such profound awareness of your own psychological patterns that you gain the freedom to choose responses aligned with your authentic values rather than programmed triggers. Put "I choose freedom over programming" in the comments if you're beginning to recognize how these emotional patterns have been operating in your life without your conscious awareness. Now, I want to go even deeper into what happens when you begin mastering your emotional responses. The goal in this journey isn't to suppress or eliminate emotional reactions. That would be both impossible and undesirable. Instead, you're learning the art of emotional conversion, transforming raw feeling into strategic advantage through a process of internal alchemy. When anger arises, instead of immediately exploding or shutting down, you examine it with curiosity. What information is this anger providing? What boundaries might it be protecting? How could this energy be channeled into focused action rather than destructive outburst? The emotion becomes fuel for strategic positioning rather than impulsive reaction. When hurt surfaces, rather than displaying vulnerability or seeking immediate comfort, you study it while maintaining composure. You recognize the valuable data it provides about your attachments and expectations while choosing carefully if, when, and how to reveal this information. The hurt becomes intelligence rather than weakness. When fear appears, instead of retreating into safety or panicking, you sharpen it into heightened alertness and more careful preparation. You recognize that fear often signals the presence of important opportunities disguised as threats. The fear becomes precision rather than paralysis. The revelation that transforms everything is that emotions themselves aren't the problem. It's our unconscious relationship with them that creates suffering and surrenders our power. By developing a conscious, strategic partnership with your emotional responses, you transform what most people experience as vulnerability into sources of insight and advantage. This transformation leads to a form of freedom that most people never experience, a psychological independence that fundamentally changes how you move through the world. When you stop needing approval from everyone around you, you become immune to social pressure and manipulation tactics that depend on your desire for acceptance. When you stop fearing loss, you become immune to threats and ultimatums that would normally control your behavior. When you stop craving love and validation from external sources, you become immune to betrayal because your emotional stability no longer depends on others' actions. This emotional independence creates a profound shift in how you navigate relationships and make important decisions. You're no longer operating from a place of neediness, fear, or desperate desire for validation. You're making choices from a centered place of self-command, where your decisions align with your authentic values and long-term objectives rather than immediate emotional impulses. The journey toward this kind of emotional mastery is essentially the development of a psychological superpower that most people never acquire. While others around you remain caught in their emotional reactions, responding from places of hurt, fear, or immediate impulse, you begin operating from an entirely different vantage point. Think about it this way. When someone is drowning in emotional intensity, they can only see their immediate crisis. Their perspective becomes completely consumed by the overwhelming feeling. But when you're standing on the shore, calm and observant, you can see the entire landscape, the currents, the deeper waters, the safe passages, the broader context. Write in the comments, "I choose perspective over reaction," if you're committed to developing this level of emotional detachment in your own life. The transformation this creates in how others perceive and respond to you is nothing short of remarkable. When people realize they can't get a rise out of you, that their usual tactics for emotional manipulation simply bounce off your composed exterior, something profound shifts in their behavior toward you. They begin to fear you, but not in the conventional sense. It's not that you've threatened them or displayed any aggression. The fear comes from something far more unsettling. You've become unreadable, unpredictable, and fundamentally unbreakable. This fear is rooted entirely in uncertainty. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable with what they can't predict or control. When they encounter someone whose buttons they can't find, whose triggers remain hidden, whose emotional responses don't follow expected patterns, they experience a unique kind of psychological discomfort. This discomfort transforms into a subtle reverence that looks remarkably like respect. What's happening? Behind the scenes is a complete reversal of typical power dynamics. Most people unconsciously expect emotional reciprocity. If they express anger, you should respond with either defensiveness or counter-anger. If they attempt to shame you, you should show embarrassment. When you consistently break these expected patterns while maintaining complete composure, you become a psychological enigma they can't solve. Now, I want to go even deeper into what might be the most sophisticated technique in psychological warfare. Something so subtle yet devastatingly effective that most people never even realize it's happening to them. The most dangerous weapon in human dynamics isn't aggression, threats, or displays of dominance. It's something far more elegant and psychologically devastating: the mirror technique. This approach works because of a fundamental truth about human psychology. People fear their own reflection more than they fear external threats. When you learn to reflect someone's behavior, energy, and emotional state back to them while revealing absolutely nothing of your own internal world, you create a deeply uncomfortable psychological experience for them. They're essentially forced to confront their own patterns, insecurities, and motivations without the comfort of understanding yours. The mirror technique is particularly powerful because it uses minimal energy while creating maximum impact. You're not fighting or arguing. You're simply becoming a neutral, reflective surface. They project their assumptions, fears, and strategies onto you, and all you do is hold steady, giving them nothing to work with except their own psychological material bouncing back at them. The revelation that transforms everything about this approach is what happens when you consistently reveal nothing about your own thoughts, motivations, or emotional state. You create a psychological vacuum that others feel compelled to fill. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable with emptiness and uncertainty. So when faced with someone who remains completely neutral and unreadable, they begin projecting their own assumptions, fears, and interpretations onto that blank canvas. This projection process becomes almost desperate at times. People will try increasingly harder to pull information from you, to get some kind of emotional reaction, to understand what you're thinking or feeling. But when you remain steadfastly unreadable, something fascinating happens. They begin to fold under the weight of their own reflection. They're essentially having a conversation with themselves while you simply observe, gathering intelligence about their true character and motivations. Type, "I am the mirror, not the reflection," in the comments if you're beginning to understand the power of becoming psychologically unreadable to others. Machiavelli understood something about power dynamics that most people never grasp. A hidden truth that transforms everything about human interaction. Manipulation and control thrive on disclosure. Every piece of personal information you reveal becomes potential ammunition that others can use against you later. Your fears, your insecurities, your triggers, your goals, all of this becomes valuable intelligence that can be leveraged to influence your decisions and behavior. The revelation that changes everything is that powerful people protect their psychological data with the same vigilance that intelligence agencies protect classified information. Instead of being an open book that everyone can read and predict, you become what operatives call a gray man, someone who blends into the background, gathering information while giving away nothing of strategic value. This approach isn't about being secretive in a paranoid sense. It's about understanding that information asymmetry creates a fundamental power imbalance. You listen 10 times more than you speak. You observe patterns in others' behavior while keeping your own patterns hidden. You collect data while maintaining complete operational security around your own plans and vulnerabilities. Behind the scenes of this transformation is the breaking of one of society's most deeply ingrained habits, the compulsive need to explain and defend yourself. This might be the most difficult shift you'll undergo because it goes against everything you've been taught about communication and relationships. But here's the truth that changes everything. Truly powerful people don't explain themselves or justify their actions to others. Every time you feel compelled to explain your decisions, your behavior, or your choices, you're essentially cracking your own psychological armor. Every defense you offer is a surrender of frame. The moment you start scrambling to justify yourself, you've already lost ground in the invisible war of perception that's constantly happening in human interactions. You've shifted from a position of authority to a position of submission, even though it feels like you're just being reasonable or clarifying misunderstandings. Now, I want to go even deeper into what might be the most sophisticated level of psychological influence: frame domination. This goes beyond individual tactics and techniques. This is about controlling the entire lens through which others perceive reality itself. Real power doesn't come from winning arguments or proving points. It comes from determining the context within which those arguments and points get evaluated. Whoever controls the frame controls what gets considered true, relevant, and important. Whoever controls the truth controls the room, the relationship, the negotiation, the entire dynamic. This isn't about manipulating facts. It's about establishing the perspective from which those facts get interpreted and understood. The journey toward this level of influence requires you to understand that most people unconsciously adopt frameworks created by someone else, their parents, their culture, social media, peer groups. But when you develop the awareness to create your own frame and project it powerfully, others begin unconsciously adopting your perspective as their own. They start naturally agreeing with your viewpoint, supporting your decisions, aligning with your worldview, because you've established the context within which they're thinking. This transformation culminates in what could be called the untouchable mind, the final evolution of emotional sovereignty. This isn't an impenetrable wall, but an inner fortress that doesn't flinch under pressure. doesn't chase validation or approval, and doesn't bleed emotional energy for people who haven't earned that investment. It's not emotional numbness, but emotional mastery at the highest level. Put "I am becoming untouchable" in the comments if you're committed to developing this level of emotional sovereignty in your own life. If you've made it this far in our exploration of psychological mastery and emotional sovereignty, you're already demonstrating something that separates you from most people. You've invested your time and attention in concepts that require patience, discipline, and genuine commitment to personal transformation. Qualities that are increasingly rare in today's world of instant gratification and constant distraction. The principles we've explored together aren't just theoretical concepts. They're practical tools that can fundamentally reshape how you navigate relationships, handle conflicts, and move through the world with genuine confidence and composure. This journey toward the untouchable mind isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It's about developing such profound inner strength that external chaos no longer disturbs your center. I create this content specifically for people who want to go deeper than surface-level self-improvement, for those who are ready to develop the kind of mental discipline that creates lasting change in how others perceive and interact with you. If that resonates with your own path of development, I'd appreciate you subscribing to join others who are walking this same journey towards psychological mastery. Drop "This message was meant for me" in the comments if you made it through this entire exploration of strategic psychology. It helps me understand who's truly committed to this path versus those who are just browsing through. And if our conversation about emotional sovereignty felt valuable to you, a like on the video ensures more people who could benefit from these insights get the chance to discover them. There's something powerful about finding content that speaks directly to where you are in your personal growth journey. There's a video right here that dives even deeper into the practical application of these psychological principles in everyday situations. Click and continue with me over there, because what we've covered today is just the foundation of what's possible when you truly master the art of strategic thinking and emotional control.